Hello everyone, and welcome to Biology 108. This is the overview for Chapter 1, so we're going to go over some of the basics. The syllabus is on Blackboard, and there's another introductory video that goes over the syllabus, so we're not going to talk about that right now. The introductions we've done also on the Blackboard site. We're going to skip this. I want to let you know first off some resources to help you succeed. The Blackboard site has lots of good things, and the course introductory video goes over that, as well as the Mastering AMP website. YouTube, if you want to learn anything, go to YouTube. iTunes U has several audio podcasts over anatomy and physiology. Those other two things are only going to help you if you're on campus, so we'll skip them. We're going to skip over this too. So let's get into the topic of your book. The first thing it talks about is some things to help you succeed, because this is going to be a hard class. You can do it, but it's not going to be easy. So one thing is to try to approach the information in different ways. Maybe you watch a video one way, you read one way, and I'll try to give you several tools to do that. Set up a study schedule. You need to do that if you want to succeed. You need to have a block of time each day that's when you're going to focus on anatomy and physiology. Practicing memorization is good. Unfortunately, there's some memorization in this class. Don't think there are shortcuts. You need to attend all the lectures and labs. Well, you need to do everything on the Blackboard site. Read the material before coming to class. So what I would encourage you to do for this online course is to read the material before you watch these videos and see what questions you have after that. Then watch these videos and fill in the handouts, and then see if that answers your questions. Do not procrastinate. It's okay to work ahead in this class, and it's not okay to work behind. And get help immediately if you don't understand something. Much of the information we learn here builds on knowledge that we already had, like you need to read the chapters in order. If you don't understand chapter 1, you're not going to be able to understand chapter 3, and etc. Okay, and since this is an online class, it's going to take a lot of self-discipline, but you can do it. So now let's get into some of the content. I want to show you this. This figure actually comes from a different book, but it's talking about memory. So a lot of information goes into our brain, and it goes into what's called a temporary storage in our cerebral cortex. That's in our brain. Important things are selected for transfer to our short-term memory. Other things are lost, or we forget them. Then from short-term memory, they can either be forgotten or they can be sent to our long-term memory. So everything for this class you want to get put in your long-term memory, right? So ways to influence data transfer are right here. Excitement, so if you're excited about it, that's going to help get it into long-term memory. Rehearsal or repetition, if you hear it over and over and over again, that's going to help get it into long-term memory. And associating new data with stored data. So if you can associate something you're learning with something you already know, that's another way to help it to get into the long-term memory. And hopefully it won't fall into this data unretrievable category. Okay, so now the content. First off, biology is the study of life. This picture represents life. So that's the first blank you need to fill in if you didn't figure that out. There are certain characteristics that all living organisms share. Those would be responsiveness, or the ability to respond to a change. Adaptability, that's the ability to adapt or change. Growth and reproduction, we grow and we also reproduce to perpetuate the species. Movement, we gotta move. Respiration, we bring in certain gases and use them and breathe out other gases. Circulation, we have to move things around within our bodies. Digestion, we have to bring in nutrients and break them down. And then excretion, we have to get rid of wastes. All those are characteristics of living organisms, and depending on the organism, those can be very simple or very complex. All right, next, anatomy is the study of, and this is a heart, but we're trying to get you to see, we're looking at the structure of it. Anatomy is the study of structure. So we basically look at stuff. In an anatomy lab, you look at a lot of stuff. And by looking at stuff, we a lot of times can get an idea of its function, which we'll get to in a second. But first, there are some subdivisions of anatomy. There's gross anatomy, which is things you can see with the naked eye. Then there's microscopic anatomy, where you need a microscope. We also have things like regional anatomy. Regional anatomy would be focusing on like the leg or a certain area. Radiographic anatomy would be using x-rays, or these are actually MRIs, I believe. So using imaging techniques to look inside the body, that's radiographic anatomy. Then we have physiology. Physiology is the study of function. So this figure is showing us, at the top here you have an EKG, which is a recording of the electrical activity of the heart. And then down here it's showing us the pressures at different times throughout the cardiac cycle, the pressures in different places. And you'll learn all about this actually in next semester in Biology 109. But physiology is the study of function, or how things work. There are some branches of, so structure is anatomy, physiology is function. And if you miss those on the test, you miss double points. All right, there are some branches of physiology. It can be systemic, like cardiology is the study of the cardiovascular system. Cell biology is the study of cells, and molecular biology is looking at the molecules of life. We'll see throughout this class that form and function are related. Another way to say that is form dictates function. If you look at the structure of something, a lot of times that will give you a clue as to its function. So for example, this, hopefully you can tell that looks like a gate hinge, and that is what it is. It's a gate hinge. If you look at this, this is something from your body. It also kind of looks like a gate hinge. That's actually your ulna, bone in your arm. And if we look at how the ulna works, we can see here's the ulna here, and it works like a hinge. And it forms your elbow joint, which is called a hinge joint. So it looks like a hinge, and it is a hinge. That is its function as well. So we'll see over and over throughout the semester that form dictates function, and that's called the principle of complementarity. All right, next topic is the levels of structural organization. Our body is highly organized, and we can look at different levels. So the smallest level would be looking at the chemical level. And this is showing some atoms, and atoms combine to form molecules. So here's my molecule. So atoms combine to form molecules. That's the first level. And then those molecules can form more complex things like a protein. But the next level up is the cellular level. And cells, here's a cell, cells are made up of molecules. Many, many molecules make up a cell, but that's the next level up. Then getting more complex, several cells can join together to form a tissue. So a tissue consists of similar types of cells. And then even more complex than that would be the organ. So the heart's an example of an organ. An organ's made up of different types of tissue. This has got some muscle tissue and some nervous tissue and some connective tissue. Then the next level up would be an organ system. This is the cardiovascular system here. It consists of different organs that work closely together. So in this case, it's the heart and blood vessels working together. And then finally, we get the organism, the whole person. That would be you, and the organism is made up of the organ systems. And you're going to read about the 11 organ systems later on. Before we get to homeostasis, cells are the smallest units of life, and we'll talk about them more in detail in Chapter 3. Tissues are specialized groups of cells, and that will be the focus of Chapter 4, so we'll talk more about that later. But what's in Chapter 1 gives you a good overview of cells and tissues. The organs and the organ systems perform vital functions. You need to know the organs and the functions of the organ systems. It's explained really well in your book, so I'm not going to rehash it here for you, but make sure you go through that in your book. All right, then homeostasis is our next topic. Homeostasis is the ability to maintain a relatively stable internal environment in an ever-changing outside world. So our body wants everything to be the same. It tries to maintain a relatively stable internal environment in an ever-changing outside world. We say that the body's in a dynamic state of equilibrium, which kind of doesn't make sense because dynamic means changing and equilibrium means the same. But our outside environment is constantly changing. There's an example of that. Animals that live in the waves. Sometimes they're wet, sometimes they're dry. Our changes aren't that drastic, but things like the temperature changes, the amount of nutrients we have available changes, lots of things change. But our body wants things to be constant to keep us healthy, and to do that we have several homeostatic control mechanisms. And there are 3 parts of a homeostatic control mechanism. The first part would be a receptor. You got to have a receptor to detect a change, otherwise you won't know there's a change. So the receptor monitors the environment in response to changes, or we call them stimuli. We have to have a stimulus that produces a change first. Then we've got a receptor. Then the second part of a homeostatic control mechanism would be the control center. That determines the set point at which the variable is maintained. One that probably everyone is familiar with is our temperature. Average temperature is 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's an example of a set point. We try to keep our body at a set point. Then the third component of this homeostatic control mechanism is the effector. That provides the means to respond to the stimuli. So let's look at an example of this. Here again is the example of body temperature. So we can see here's the set point at 37, and that doesn't mean that our body's always at that temperature. Our body's somewhere in this range, hopefully. And different things happen. When we get too hot, we start to sweat, or our blood vessels dilate, and that will cause us to lose heat to the environment. As we start to get colder, we'll stop sweating, and our blood vessels will constrict. And we'll talk more about this later on in the semester. But that's an example of a homeostatic control mechanism. And again, here's the 3 components: the receptor, the control center, and then the effector. And there are a couple types of mechanisms. The most common is a negative feedback mechanism. And in a negative feedback mechanism, they're designed to provide stability. So negative feedback provides stability. So let's look at this as temperature. You can think of this as a teeter-totter, and we want it to be in balance, but something is going to happen to make this out of balance. Our temperature increased. See here, there's our set point, our temperature increased. So the thermostat here would be like the receptor. It's going to send a signal to the control center. In this case, the control center is the thermostat. And then that thermostat is going to have the set point, and it's going to send a message to an effector, which in this case is the heater. And in this case, our temperature got too hot, so our heater is going to shut off, and it's going to bring us back to normal. That could also work if the opposite happens, if we get too cold. So now our receptor has seen that we are cold. It's going to send a signal to our control center. It determines that we're too cold. It's going to send a signal to the heater. In this case, it's going to turn on the heater, and that's going to warm us up and get us back into balance. And then we're happy again. A positive feedback mechanism accelerates a process to completion. So blood clotting is an example. Another example is pregnancy. You want these things to happen fast. So what happens with blood clotting is you get a tear in the blood vessel, some chemicals are released, and they attract what are called platelets. And we'll talk more about this next semester, how this all works, but as these platelets come, they release more chemicals, which attract more platelets, which release more chemicals, which attract more platelets, and it keeps going and going and going in this circle until the clot is formed and the bleeding stops. Blood clotting is something we want to happen rapidly. Labor is also something that you want to happen rapidly, so that's what positive feedback is used for. Again, here's the positive feedback cycle. So there's a tear, platelets come, they release chemicals which attract more platelets, which release more chemicals, which attract more platelets, which release more chemicals, etc. until we have this platelet plug and we're not bleeding anymore. Homeostatic imbalance is when one of these control centers gets out of balance. A good example is we want to keep our blood sugar in a stable level, and when that doesn't happen, a good example of a disease is diabetes. So homeostatic imbalance leads to disease. Okay. A couple other things left in this chapter. You need to review the anatomical terms, the quadrants and regions of the abdomen, the directional terms, the body planes. I'm not going to go through them on here. Your book does a good job. Also review the body cavities. We're going to be using those terms throughout the semester, so you'll need to learn them so you'll understand what we're talking about. Your homework for Chapter 1 is on Blackboard. The introductory video is going to talk more about that. So enjoy. Email me or ask in the discussion board if you've got any questions about any of these topics.